And I will just give a quick update really on, yeah. So I would like just to introduce our team. Most of you guys already know us. So again, I'm Anna Mészáros, Palm Beach County Vegetable Extension Agent. And my counterpart is Greg Frey, who is an extension agent out in Henry County. He's responsible for multiple counties. And we are all working together. And we have a new assistant, Megan Fuss. She's right here. And she's helping us with a little bit about everything. So we are collaborating with 4 different research stations, Southwest Florida Research and Education Center, EREC, where you are here today, TREC, the Tropical Research and Education Center, and GCREC up in Bonn. And this is really a nice collaboration among us. So how we try to get the news to you, basically we have 3 options. One is the South Florida Pest and Disease Hotline. We try to send that out every 3 weeks. Sometimes things get busy and then we get a little behind, but we appreciate your help with that. And then also we have research connections and different growers meeting that we try to send out again every 3 weeks, just to update you about upcoming meetings. So this is the first thing, the South Florida Pest and Disease Hotline. Again, we are monitoring population dynamics of over 30 pests and diseases during the South Florida vegetable production season, which is, during winter time. And then we have contributors, and I would like to thank now, because I saw a lot of crop consultants and scouts here today. They are contributing a lot. They are giving us information, what they are seeing in the field, because basically they are the boots on the ground. They are the ones who are seeing what's going on. I try to be out there, but by myself, I cannot scout all the whole entire Palm Beach County. And same with Megan, and same with Craig, and then same with all the research people too, because they are contributing to this hotline too. So you are seeing me send out emails, or Megan send out emails and ask you, what do you see in the field? So we appreciate all the help. And then also sometimes growers can help us. So this is distributed every 3 weeks. And then this is basically what you see. We divided Central and South Florida into different regions. We have Central Florida, Southwest Florida, the EAA, East Coast, which is kind of a little bit difficult because we have some area really close to the East Coast and then a little bit of more inland in Palm Beach County. And then also Homestead. And you can see here, usually we write a little descriptions, what we've been seeing, and then Megan is creating all the maps and then helping me and Craig putting this together. And then just see, for example, here you had whitefly, and then we kind of describe what we see, if the populations of the whiteflies are increasing, decreasing, or stay the same. And with this one, how we can store this. Basically, after that, Megan is working on the website. And I try to put this on the other side. Here you go. So this is what you see when you go to our website, the commercial vegetable production website. And then we store all these reports, what we are collecting together. So you can find them. Even if you miss the email, you can come here, you can click on the report part of it, and then you can see that was the last one, the December 3rd. And then basically you can get to the same report we sent out before. Back to that, so here you just scroll down again. You can even, let's say, we had a special alert. Everybody knows, hopefully now, that we had this tree spot spinus causing a lot of problem on pepper, and then we try to monitor it. So this year we will be a little bit more ahead of the game, and then we can have the growers. Also, so you have all these reports here, and then going back, we have this research connections. This is a really nice collaboration. Again, we try to kind of not advertise but tell you what our researchers are doing. So this was the latest one with Dr. Gary Ballard, but also all the researchers. We had some information last time about Thrips parvispinus. And if you go back, we have Tara Wade contributed to the website to this research connection. She's actually here today. So you can just go back and see what we had before. And then quickly, the last one, this is quite important, growers meeting. So you have, if I'm not there. All right, Megan, you need to fix this. So you have the upcoming growers meeting. which is basically, this one is already passed. This is where you are here today. And if you miss my email or any registration, you can just go here and then you click the registrations and then you can sign up too. And one of the next one, I think it's gonna happen soon. It's, you know, we try to put all the upcoming meetings here and you can sign up here too. And then I'm talking about this growers meeting here because when we can, we try to do our best. We try to record these meetings and then put it on the website. So you can get your CEUs if you take a pre-test and the post-test too. So we can, this is really nice setup. We can monitor, you know, your progress, but the bottom line is when you are done, you take your post-test and then you can obtain your CEUs. So if you are, I know some people are lacking of CEUs at the end of the season. So this is where you can find. Not all of our meetings are here, but we try to organize it still in progress. What we had from 2020 up to 2022, and then we try to put everything up here. It takes time, but bear with us. So basically, this is what I was going to show. Let me see if I close this. Hold on, sorry, I have the. Okay, and then whatever I have here. So that was just, again, these trips that caused a lot of problem on the East Coast. I wanted to show you just a few pictures. But basically, and what we are trying to do today, these days, really monitor and get ahead of the game because this is out there. So with that, that was my little introduction. So now you know where to find things and then what we are doing, how we try to get the information to you. And with that, we can go to our next speaker. And so I would like to introduce Tara Wade, who is an economist. And then if I can find back here you go. And she's actually working in Immokalee with the Southwest Florida Research and Education Center. And today she's going to talk about the past 10 years of sweet corn production and price trend. I think you are right. You are right here. You can use this if you want to, or this one. I think it might be quickly. Okay, and then you can. This is your clicker.
Make sure you turn off that one.
Yeah.
Hello? Hello, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Anna. Thank you for having me. Again, I'm Tara Wade. I'm coming to you from Immokalee. I am a natural resource economist. I don't usually talk about prices. I usually talk about behavior, but we're putting together a series of EDIS documents that tries to compile these very basic information about prices, acres, volume shipped typically, and this, for some reason, this just hasn't been put in one place for you and other interested parties to see. So you can think of this as like a state of the industry over the past 10 years kind of thing. We stop in 2022, so I'll talk to you some more about that. So this one is not published yet, so you can think of this as a preview. It's a great opportunity for you to give comments. It's not too late to make changes to this, and we really value particularly growers' contributions to these documents. So from 2014 to 2023, sweet corn is one of the top 3 products in the US. It's the second most popular vegetable. It's grown in all states on over 230,000 acres. Fresh markets, the top fresh market states include Florida, California, Georgia, and New York. For processed sweet corn, we're talking about Minnesota, Oregon, Washington, and Wisconsin. And in 2022, the value of all the sweet corn was $809 million. This is a 22% increase from 2021. So what we're going to focus today on, is very short talk, is on fresh market sweet corn only. We're only looking at the top states. So that's again going to be Florida, California, Georgia, and New York. And we're just gonna look at what's been happening with the acres harvested, the average prices received, and the value of production. All of this data comes from NASS, and this is the publicly available data we have. We know that there are some caveats with NASS data, but this is our source. All right, so for acres harvested, nobody really beats Florida over this 13 years. On average, Florida harvests over 35,000 acres annually. This is 19% more than California, 37% more than Georgia, and 45% more than New York. There has been a serious decline since 2020. This is what we think is in response to a decline in consumer demand. And this is happening all over the country. There has been a general decline in demand. And then this also coincides with increased imports. So supply has been up in other places, drives prices down. Growers are less likely to, or planting less acres, but still more than the other states. So for price trends, price is pretty steady up until 2019. COVID, and these are average, right? This does not include seasonality. This is averaged over the entire market year. And in 2020, we see huge spikes in prices. Now for Florida, my understanding from one of our co-authors is that this average for Florida, just for Florida, might be a little lower because if you weren't under contract, if you had opportunities or you didn't have a particularly high contract price, the market growers were getting anywhere from $40 to $50 per crate. So that is much higher than usual. That cost or that price is not going to be reflected in this average. So the prices for Florida could have been a little bit higher than what NAS is showing. Georgia had a huge spike, $58 per hundredweight in 2020. So what that happened there, we believe, is that in April of that year, they saw what was happening in Florida and decided to reduce with the shutdowns and decided to reduce their acres. So that's combined with, the increased demand from people staying home, perfect recipe for higher prices. So we have a $58 price per hundredweight for Georgia. For value of production, let's go back to Georgia again, because that $58 is so substantial. It increased their value of production a lot. Still not as high as, say, California, but really an impressive year for Georgia. That is so on average, their value of production was $5,800 per acre. That's a 96% increase from the year before. California leads every year in value of production, even in some of their lowest years. This is by 2014. Even in some of their dips, they're still leading in value of production. And that is just over $5,000 per acre on average. Now, for the 13-year averages, we know a lot gets lost in averages, but still some things that I'd like to highlight. Florida is the highest for prices, $32 per hundredweight on average over the 13 years. Highest harvested acres, 36,000 acres. The third highest yield at 134 hundredweight per acre, and the second highest for value of production. So some general comments. Like I mentioned before, over the past 30 years, there's been a general decline in demand for sweet corn, a 43% decline. Florida is still, despite this, Florida is still one of the top producing states with anywhere from 35,000 to 40,000 acres annually, contributing $150 million to that industry. Seasonality, it was not discussed here, but seasonality matters. It's really going to affect those prices when you're hitting the market and what competition looks like when you're hitting the market. Mexican imports or imports from other countries are coming in at the same time that our sweet corn growers are harvesting. So this affects prices. Also, there's possibility, some years there's overlap with states like Georgia. If Georgia plants a little earlier, there can be overlap. This affects supply. That's going to affect prices. It affects how much our growers get. So this is not discussed, but I know this is what you guys see, and it's important, but it doesn't weigh into the overall averages. So it's not a focus here. And I mentioned before, this is one of 5 EDIS documents. We talk about the top 5 economically important crops in Florida, excluding citrus. So that's sweet corn, watermelon, peppers, tomatoes, and strawberries. And this is one that we hope will be coming out. It's going to be ready now. This is a slow process, so maybe this will come out next year. And and again, you can see what things look like over time. The idea is we'll keep adding the years to this and keep looking at maybe 10, 15 years so that we can, in a snapshot, you can see what's happening with some basic things in the industry. So I wanted to sneak this in. This is not related to the talk per se, but while I have your attention, my student is leading a grower survey that should be coming to you soon. He is looking at, this is a part of his dissertation, and that is my plug for like my, please take it because he needs this for his dissertation. So he's looking at the willingness to pay for pest management applications, these risk applications. We know that these apps are on the market. We know that growers are paying for these apps, but we didn't see any studies that talked about what you wanted from these apps. So this survey is trying to get at just that, the kind of attributes that you're looking for and how much you're willing to pay for those attributes. We're hoping that this will help guide the development of these apps and also kind of help to inform anything that wants to help you pay for these apps, to focus on those types of attributes. So if you have any questions, I don't know that we have time here, but here's my email. And thank you so much for your attention. And many thanks to my co-authors for all their contributions to this document.
Thank you, Tara. Does anybody has any questions? And I just want to point out that we are going to work all together on this EDIS publication. I think Tori Rumenik is in the back. She's with FFVA, and she is a really good help to just to have an overall idea of what's going on in production and then in trade and then in prices, because we don't know all these kind of things. So thank you for that, Tori. Anybody? Any questions? All right. Thank you, Tara, again. Good. Right, so let me just give me a second. And so our next speaker is going to be Calvin Odero. He is our lead scientist here at the Everglades Research and Education Center, and he is going to give an update on sweet corn weed management.
Good morning. I'll talk about sweet corn weed management, and as Anna said, weed scientist here working on sweet corn and sugarcane and all the crops that are grown here in rotation with cane. So I'm just going to give more of just some updates on, not really updates, but like revisiting some of the weed management program that we have for sweet corn here in the Glades and in the general area. So I'll start by going through some of the problem weeds that we have, mostly grass weeds, the most problematic in sweet corn. Fall panicum being the major one. So fall panicum, being the first one, and followed by goose grass. We've got scrub grasses. Sometimes you can see crowfoot grass. Okay. So, going back to determining how to tell the difference between the grasses. Let's say, can anyone tell me the difference? How would you tell the difference between, let's say, fall panicum and goosegrass? If you found a small seedling. So with grasses, the best thing to look at is the appendage between the leaf, the sheath. When you look at the leaf blade, so the appendage between the leaf blade and the leaf sheath, called the ligule. And usually it's mostly either a membranous ligule or a hairy ligule. So which one between fall panicum and goosegrass would have a hairy or a membranous ligule? People who've taken the weed ID class. So typically, yeah, fall panicum will have the hairy ligule on it. Goosegrass is going to have a membranous ligule. And then the goosegrass stem is going to be very flat, flattened compared to fall panicum. And then fall panicum will be a little bit, will be hairy on the leaf sheath. Crabgrasses also are very hairy, but they do have a membranous ligule. So that's, all those three. The fall panicum, goosegrass will be hairy. These are the hairy ligule. Crabgrass, sorry, has a membranous ligule. Goosegrass membranous, but not hairy. And then crowfoot grass, typically the ligule is hairy, just like fall panicum, but the plant is not going to be having the hairy sheath. And then coming to nutsedges, which are also grass-like, the most common ones are yellow nutsedge and purple nutsedge. And the easier way to tell the difference between the two is that in yellow nutsedge, usually the leaf tip gradually tapers compared to purple nutsedge that has an abrupt taper. But the easiest way, I mean, if you're out in the field, if you pull the plant and you end up with one where the tubers are at the end of the rhizome, here is the tuber, then that will be yellow nutsedge. But if you pull them out and then they're connected by wiry rhizome, by wiry chains, then that will tell you it's purple nutsedge. So that's just how to easily tell the difference between those. And I do have some handouts that give descriptions of all these weeds. If those who don't have them can pick them up. And then for broadleaf weeds, we have common lamb squatters, which is usually very, very common. And this one has some gray mealy coating on the leaves, which you can see right there, and some very uneven tooth leaf margin. Spiny amaranth, the leaf tip we will have a little bit of a notch to it, and then it has spines around the nodes. And on some of our sandland areas where people grow sweet corn too, you'll come across slender amaranth. It's same group as spiny amaranth, but it's not going to have spines. The notch on the leaf tip is much more deeper. Then we do have common purslane, where the leaves are very thick and fleshy, and it doesn't have any leaf stalk to it. And then the nightshade, the American black nightshade, you can see that one is also common. The leaves are very dark green in color with small hairs. And the stem, when it's just coming up, will be a little bit purplish. And then common ragweed, the leaves are going to be lobed, as you can see in that picture for the seedling, and hairy, and the stem will also be purple. So with the weed idea, I always try and hopefully have everybody learn how to identify them when they're small. Because that's, when you want to get good control, the best timing is when most of these weed species are small. So you don't want to know how to ID them after they flower. And I always say, kind of the rule of thumb, if you take like a credit card and the height of a credit card, typically anything you want to do your weed control, based on that height or something smaller. That's when you get efficacy with most of the herbicide products that are out there. So I'll go through some of the practices that we do, pre-planting and the planting phase of sweet corn. Typically, of course, you'll conduct your soil analysis before planting. And then that's the point when you then plan for your weed control program before you initiate your planting. And it's ideal to select, if you are using a true pre-emergence program, it's appropriate to select pre-emergence herbicides that will be based on, of course, the soil conditions. By that, I mean, if it's too dry, there are no chances of rain and so forth. I mean, it's not worth putting down any pre-emergence, because there will be no way to move it down into the soil. And then base whatever pre-emergence herbicide you'll use, base it on the weed spectrum that was there in your previous crop, because you'll have an idea of what to expect, whether you're going to have a lot of grass weeds or broadleaf weeds, or whether you'll have sedges. So most pre-emergence products, you're going to apply them, from planting all the way until before either the weeds or the crops emerge. And there are a number of products that I've listed here that can typically be used for pre-emergence weed control programs. You can use dual all the way to before, the weed emergence. the rate of duals, goes up to 1.6 pints an acre. I don't know if anyone uses Prowl, so, which also goes up to 4.8 pints per acre if you're using that on mark. Atrazine from 2 to 6 pints. So the first two products, Dual and Prowl, will of course mostly target grass weeds. Dual will have some activity on some of the sedges that are out there. And then Atrazine and Callisto would be for broadleaf weeds. I don't know if there is anyone who truly uses Callisto as a pre, but as much as it's a post-emergence, but it can also be used as a pre-emergence product, mostly for controlling broadleaf weeds. And then there's a product called Zidua. It's the herbicide group 15, the same group as Dual or S-metolachlor. It's very good for both broadleaf weeds and grasses. And also it does have some activity on sedges. So the use rate is very low, from 4 to 6.5 fluid ounces. So if you're using on mark soils, I mean, you can go with a higher rate. I know there have been issues with rotational restrictions and so forth, but we are working on, especially when you'll be following your sweet corn with something like cane, we're working on trying to, getting labeled or for use in sugarcane, so that is not going to be really an issue. But with all these products, as you can see, what I put there, you need some rainfall to incorporate them, or if you are using overhead sprinklers, some real rain to do that, to have them to be effective. So if when it's dry, bone dry, you don't want to use any pre-emergence product if there's going to be no rainfall to incorporate them, because otherwise you'll just be kind of wasting money. So if you're not able to do any pre-emergence, here's just some information to show how some of these products work. So this picture down here, that's atrazine. As I mentioned, it's mostly for broadleaf weeds, and you can see in the graph, the B is for the broadleaf weeds, and then G is the control for grasses. So if you can tell in this picture, the broadleaf weed control was very good. Grass control is almost not there. Dual Magnum is also good for mostly grasses, but not much on broadleaf weeds. And then Zidua at the very high rate, 6.5, it gives you both good broadleaf and grass control. And there's a situation where we had some rainfall after application. But typically, even with Zidua, if there's no rainfall after application, then you really don't get that much control with it. You can interrupt me if you've got any questions. So in cases where you're not able to use any true pre-emergence herbicide, which is very common in our area, because when we grow sweet corn, let's say in the spring, it's typically very dry. You plant, and then mostly rely on post-emergence weed control programs. So the first thing, if you ever feel like this, the ideal thing is to first identify your weeds after sweet corn emergence, kind of determine the weed density threshold at which you'll be able to have some economic benefit from using herbicides. But typically on mark soil, I mean, your weed pressure is going to be very high. So there's going to be no way around not using any control program. And then consider the critical period of weed control. You want to look at the window when you really need to go in and apply your control program so that you have an efficacious program. And then, of course, make sure you select proper control measures. So with weeds, when identifying weeds, of course, consider things as, depending on the weed species, the leaf shape. For grasses, look at what the ligule is to tell you the difference between what is there. Some of the broadleaf weeds, look at things like the color, the growth habit, and any distinctive features that might tell the difference between weeds. So it's usually helpful to identify the growth stage of the weeds. As I mentioned, you want to control most of these weeds when they're small. You don't want to wait until when they're big. And we do have some handouts here, some little pamphlets that can help with weed ID. Most of them, they're right over there. There's one for identifying grasses, broadleaf weeds, and sedges that are common in this area. So that can give you an idea of, once you correctly identify your weeds, then that will give you a better idea of how to go ahead with coming up with your weed control program. And I'm always here, or you can contact Anna if you've got something that you don't know, a weed species. You can always call me, call Anna, then we can help you figure out how to go about identifying that kind of weed. So I wanted to mention something about what the critical period of weed control is. And the critical period of weed control is the period in the crop growth cycle when weeds must be controlled, to avoid unacceptable yield losses. So there are models that are used to determine the critical weed period for different crops. There's some work that was done by a student here on mark soil. And what we came up with, so theoretically, weed control before and after. So with the critical period of weed control, weed control before the period begins and after that period ends really not going to make a difference. So it's basically the window, let's say, between this to the end that you really have to control weeds to avoid yield loss. And that is usually based on some arbitrary number, like 2.5% acceptable yield loss that the grower is willing to accept, or 5%, or even up to 10%. And based on what we did here on mark, for a 5% acceptable yield loss level, I mean, you need to basically control your weeds all the way from almost, the V1 stage, all the way until the R2 stage, which is the blister stage of sweet corn. So for the entirety of the sweet corn growth period. So on mark soil, it's critical to really keep your fields weed-free for that period, longer period of time to ensure that you don't end up with any yield losses. So going back to herbicides, so in case you're not able to use any pre-emergence weed control programs, so your only other option would be applying, post-emergence herbicide program. So once you've identified the weed species that we apply, present in the field, make sure you apply herbicide that would target those specific weeds, and always consider, the corn growth stage and weather conditions. So I'll put here a list of herbicides that are commonly used in sweet corn, and the window of time that you can use them. With atrazine, you can apply it from, for post-emergence, from emergence all the way until about 12, 11 inches, which would be the V4 stage. Ideally, that would be the best timing. For something like Callisto, you can apply all the way until the V8 stage, or when corn is about 30 inches tall. For those who use Bazagran, there is no height or growth restriction that is on the label for Bazagran, so basically you can use it all the way until you probably canopy closure. And then if you are using AIM, AIM can be applied according to the label all the way until the V8 stage. And then after that, you can post-direct it. After the V8 stage, it can be post-directed under the canopy. And then for Sandia, which would be for sages, Sandia can be applied through the entirety of sweet corn, all the way, through lay-by. And does anyone use Lodis? Yeah, it's also labeled for corn. It's in the same group as Callisto or Amazon. It's one of the bleachers, mostly good on broadleaf weed control. And Lodis can be applied from the V1 stage all the way until when corn is about, the V8 stage of 30 inches in height. And then lastly, Amazon, that I'm sure a lot of people use now, you can apply it from emergence all the way until the V8 stage. And the use rates, are different. I know for Amazon, the maximum rate can be up to 1 fluid ounces, but I know typically a lot of growers use the 3/4, the 0.75 ounce rate, which still gives very good control. And all these herbicides can be tank mixed to give you a very good, good weed spectrum. Callisto can be tank mixed with atrazine. That helps give you better broadleaf weed control, and also some grass control if the grasses are small. Of course, tank mixes of Amazon with atrazine or even Amazon with Bazagran gives very good, end up with very good, both broadleaf weed control and also with very good grass control. So depending on the program that you're using, tank mixes of this product will enhance the efficacy in terms of how your weeds will be controlled. So here is just some pictures and some graphs to show you how some of these products work. This was Amazon at the maximum rate, which is 1 fluid ounce, but typically I know most people use the 0.3 of an ounce. So when you use Amazon at 1 ounce, you still get very good broadleaf and grass control, as you can see from the picture above here. And then tank mixing it with atrazine even helps further, especially for both the broadleaf and grass control. So in this study, I put where we had atrazine at the maximum rate, but even atrazine at a pint with Amazon still helps, especially giving you that good both broadleaf weed and especially grass control. And then the mix with Bazagran, that was at the high rate of Bazagran. I mean, you can apply Bazagran at about 1.5 pints. But tank mix, so this shows just tank mixes of, Amazon alone, but there's usually improved or better control when you tank mix them with these photosystem 2 inhibitors, atrazine or Bazagran. And that's been shown in other like in tough grasses or in other crops where Amazon is used for weed control. Compared to the other two bleachers, Callisto and Lodis, Callisto, as you can see over there, is not, I mean, you get very good broadleaf weed control, but it's very poor on grass control. So even when you tank mix it with atrazine, it improves a little. You can tell the difference between the grass density between Callisto alone and the atrazine. That improves a little when you're looking at your grass control. In fact, you can go as high as with 4 pints per acre of atrazine with Callisto. If you have very small fall panicum, that can result in some decent control when fall panicum is still pretty small. Lodis, it's not very good with grass control. It's mostly good on just broadleaf weeds, just like Callisto. So these are some of the options that we typically have in our area here. If there's any new product that will come in the market, I'll let you guys know. Might be testing some few more in the future, and we'll see if adding more tools to our weed control kit would really be ideal. And then mechanical cultivation, is that a viable option? I think it's usually good. It supplements chemical control. We use a lot of that. You do it for healing to enhance, anchoring your sweet corn and making it resistant to lodging. So cultivation is still, I think, very, very critical after, having a very successful control program with the herbicides. And then for herbicides, I always put this, make sure you do it right. Have, the proper herbicide, the proper rates, based on starting with the correct weed ID. Proper placement of material, that is calibration, proper time of application, timing it based on the weed size. And then, of course, proper manner of application, and always make sure you read the label. All right, so with that, any questions?
Sorry, can you use the mic? Because we are recording, and then so after that we could hear you. Thank you so much.
So what did you say about the weed-free period there? The lines cross about V9.
Okay, so the critical period, it's the growth, it's the period during which weeds must be controlled to avoid yield losses. So in this graph, so between, let's say, if you want to avoid 10% yield loss, then weeds, if you start controlling, making sure your fields are weed-free from the V6 stage to almost the slightly after the R1 stage, then you end up with about a 10% yield loss. But at a 5% yield loss, you want a wider window of control from way early to almost about the R2 stage. So it's just that window in the crop cycle that weeds must be controlled to avoid any yield loss. So it's typically done for different crops. to help with the growers with determining when they have to go in. So if you delay your weed control probably until about the V6 stage, then you might still see a decline of about 10% yield loss on a max soil there. But the earlier you go, then you end up limiting the yield loss that you have.
Thank you, Kevin. If you guys have another question, we have a 20-minute break between the two big sessions, so you can find Calvin, and you can discuss that. Just one more time, again, we have all these hands out here, so you can find them on that shelf. Feel free to take one. These are the weed ID management, weed ID guides. Thank you again. All right, so our next speaker, Our next speaker is going to be Katya Xavier and her postdoc, Larissa. I'm sorry. And then they are going to talk about sweet corn diseases. So I gave them the spot. Can use the mic. Speaker, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for the introduction and for inviting us to be here today. Good morning, you all. So Larissa and I are going to talk a little bit about sweet corn disease, but when I invited Larissa to divide the time with me, she said she wanted to talk first because otherwise I wouldn't leave any time for her, because usually I make a lot of jokes in the beginning and then there's no time for her. But I would like to set up the stage for her because she's going to talk about tire spot disease. I don't know if you guys have seen tire spot symptoms on the leaves. So Larissa is going to pass some laminated leaves of sweet corn with two symptoms, northern corn leaf blight and tire spot symptoms. So you can see that's going to be during her talk. That's in a little bit. So no jokes today. Okay, let's go and talk about sweet corn disease and management, because Larissa wants 5 minutes to talk about some findings that we have about tire spot in a little bit. Okay, this is the outline for my presentation. No jokes today, but it's a little bit cold, right? So when it's cold, we think about north, because in the north it's cold. If we are in Florida, we don't expect to be cold. That's why I live here. I'm from Brazil. I like when it's warm. When it's cold, I don't like it. But I was thinking about it this morning as I was going through my slides, because actually, as I was looking at this disease, like we have northern corn leaf blight and we have southern corn leaf blight. I was just like, oh, that's interesting, right? So let's see. Let me start to show those to you. So let's talk about the blights first. Keep that in mind, okay? That's cold and it's hot, north, south. And oh yeah, thanks, Ismael. Ismael is the IT, yeah. Look. No jokes, yes. Okay, all right. That, okay. One more thing that I woke up at 3 this morning to put those slides together. Look at this, how interesting that is too. Oh, okay, here. Plant pathologists, they like these disease cycles. Every time you go to a talk, they will show those slides that has a disease cycle. And this is interesting because as I was looking to those slides, I was like, okay, that's interesting. You have the right conditions, the disease will develop. And then more rain, more disease is going to disseminate, and disease causes disease and more disease. If you don't treat it, it's going to destroy the plant. And then what they say is that in the end of the season, it's going to survive on the crop debris. And then the beginning of the season, you have more disease is going to disseminate from that to the new plants and blah, right? Is that true here? Do you guys believe that's true? I don't know. But that's interesting because usually when they do those studies, especially for corn, it's for field corn. And those studies are, most of them actually are done in the Midwest, right? And they have winter and they do no tillage or minimal tillage, right? But we do tillage, we have muck soil. And the muck soil actually, if you bury it there, the crop debris disappears really fast. So is it the same here? We don't know. is something that we want to investigate. And actually, I will start to think about it because we are doing some studies with tar spot. Larissa is going to talk about that, so keep that in mind, okay? But I think there is a lot for us to explore here with the other diseases as well, okay? Keep that in mind. So that's the disease cycle. Now, southern cornleaf blight is a very important disease here. And this one is considered to be a warm to hot temperature disease. It's how Dr. Ray would talk about those diseases, okay? I stole that from him. But look how interesting, because this disease, usually they expect to see it during the fall or late spring when it's hot, right? Makes sense. Now, think about the name. This is what I was talking about, because it's southern. Like if there was an exam after this, then you could think and put it together, right? Southern, it's hot, and this disease like hot conditions. And then this disease is aggressive on both old and new leaves. And we saw that in the field. This is very cool because we had like some field trials. We want to evaluate tar spot. And what we could evaluate was a lot of southern cornleaf blight because it was very hot, it was late in the spring of this year, actually. Now, if you think about northern cornleaf blight, that one's a little bit different because it's like a cool to moderate temperature disease. So this one will be most commonly during the spring season. I think spring here, what they mean is more like January, February, right? Because it's not as hot. Talking about Florida, it can be very hot too, but I think it's when it's not as hot, I would say. And this one will be more aggressive on old leaves. If you look this picture, actually Matt was the one who sent me that picture. You can see here the old leaves. Seems that they just burn that with fire, right? That's the pathogen. You can see how aggressive that is on the old leaves. But you can also see here on the new leaves. It's also aggressive. It's just a matter of time, okay? So it's going to infect the whole plant. And in that, I'll talk more a little bit later. I'll talk more about that picture, okay? But what about the rusts? So if you think about southern rust, southern, right? Okay, warm to hot disease. So it likes like hot temperatures. So you would expect to see this one in the fall or late spring, similar to the southern cornleaf blight. And then this one is aggressive on both new and old leaves. And this one seems that it has the wrong name, right? This is what I would think. Why they did not name this one northern rust? I don't know, but the name of this one, we cannot change the name. I would if I could, but it's common rust. We just have to accept that. But this one is a cool temperature disease, and we expect to see that one more like during the spring, and this one is more aggressive in new leaves. So today I'll just talk about those 4 diseases because when I did a survey last year, those were mentioned as the 4 most important diseases here in the area. Now, when we talk about management, it's important to consider chemical control, cultural practices, and also resistant varieties, right? So I try to summarize it here. So if we talk about chemical control, and I'm not going to read it all here, but there are some things here. I think I can use this. So for the protectants, right? If we talk about like sulfur, this one is good against rust, okay? And you guys can take a picture or we will make these slides available later so you can have access to that. Mancozeb against the blights. Chlorothalonil against the blights. There is one thing about chlorothalonil. They are trying to reduce the rate and the dose for this one. But it's something that EPA is doing. We have an email. I think Anna was going to forward that email. She stepped outside, but she can forward the email to you guys. I know for field corn, I don't remember from the top of my mind. I just read it before the talk, so I could talk. but they are reducing the dose for chlorothalonil. It's under revision again. Triazoles, you can see it's recommended against the blights, estroberulins for the rusts, and then here, carboxamides. You can see that giant list. So it's going to be available. I'm not going to read it. And so for the chemical control, to summarize, we have lots of chemistries against blights, spots, because there are other diseases, right? Spots. Lots of studies from the Midwest for field corn and rusts. Cultural practices is like start clean, stay clean. If it gets really bad, it's really hard to control. Be aware of surrounding areas, like if your neighbor is having problems with northern cornleaf blight, maybe it's better to start to spray to avoid it to get to your field. Scout for the disease, and I know we have some, forgot the name, Glades crop care. Oh, Hannah said that she couldn't hear. Okay, Glades crop care, Kevin, these guys are always scouting for disease in the field, so listen to them. They know what they are doing. They always bring me samples. So yeah, they are, you know, they are doing an incredible job in here. Yeah, so my advice is stay ahead of the disease. And in terms of resistant varieties, there are some resistance against common rust, northern cornleaf blight, and northern cornleaf spot. I didn't talk about that one today. Now, project updates. So based on a survey that I did last year, the most important disease is northern cornleaf blight. And then based on that picture, if you look, you can see how severe the disease was. Again, that's the picture that Matt sent to me. He actually brought some samples. And what he said is that the grower was spraying several chemistries, and he was not able to control the disease. So they don't know why the fungicides were not controlling the disease. So in my mind, it was just like, okay, they're spraying the fungicides, not controlling. It can be because of this pathogen has a new race in Florida, or because this pathogen has developed some resistance against those fungicides that they are spraying. So based on that idea, I wrote a proposal and I submitted it to FTEX this year, in January. Larissa helped me a lot with that one. And this project is also in collaboration with Marcio Rezende. And the objective here is, right, because it was approved and it will start now in 2024. But the objective is to characterize the pathogen population, to identify if it has races, which races are present in Florida, and then to determine if there is some fungicide resistance in the population that we have here in Florida, and then to screen some sweet corn, germplasm and hybrids. That objective is like Marcia will be more responsible, and also to create some outreach activities. And now Larissa is going to give some update about a project that we have with tar spot.
Thank you. Thank you. So can you raise your hands if you have ever heard of tar spot disease before? Now, can you raise your hand if you have actually seen the disease in person? And this is exactly why I'm here today. We see this is not a myth as much as you hear about it, but you don't see it. The disease is present. However, it's been constrained in South America countries for over 100 years. And then it arrived in the United States in 2015. And by last year, it was already the most destructive disease in corn in the Midwest and Canada, with more than 116 million bushes in losses. So in Florida, this disease arrived in 2016 in the Palm Beach County. And then by 2019, it was seen or reported in the Hendry and Miami-Dade counties. And this is a survey that we did last year and this year. And we see the disease was present in South Florida in the Homestead region, where we basically have, from what we can tell, a hotspot of tar spot. And we also see the disease here in the station and in the downtown region. The tar spot symptoms are these black spots that you can see in this leaf. And if you scratch it with your fingernail, this spot is not gonna come off. It's not like a spot of muck soil on it. And the pathogen actually harbors the spores inside of this structure, and it's called stroma. And when this stroma is surrounded by a necrotic lesion, it's called fish eye symptom. So you can see this disease in both forms. And you can start scouting for symptoms from V6. However, this disease is fairly unpredictable. You can find it in any, even up to V3 and later in the season as well. This last spring, we found the disease after we harvested. So it's good to not keep the plants alive for long. And I'll show you a little bit more about the cycle of this disease. The pathogen loves free water. So the high humidity and rain causes the stroma to sporulate or to release spores, and that's the white mucilage that you see on top of that black structure. And then with rain and wind, these spores are dispersed, and when they're deposited on the host leaf surface, and there is like optimal weather conditions, which for this pathogen is cooler temperatures between 60 to 70 degrees and humidity greater than 75%, we can have new stromata within 12 to 15 days. And then the cycle repeats over and over again throughout the growing season. And some of the host range for this pathogen include lots of grasses, including foxtail, triticale, fall panicum, etc. So it's very, very good to keep an eye on those weeds. And in terms of survival, we conducted a study here at the station where we buried some of the leaves that contain tar spot in muck soil, and we retrieved those leaves periodically, and we assessed the germination of the spore to see if it was going to survive or not. So I'm glad to report that even though we recovered some of the structure, you can see it was not fully decomposed by the time we assessed it. We did not find significant germination of these spores, which means that tillage, it's a very good strategy to control this disease. Crop rotation as well, avoid planting corn after corn, irrigation management, taking care of those alternative hosts. There are some hybrid resistance and chemical control that hopefully by next year, we're gonna have some other field trials, and hopefully we'll get some recommendations for Florida. But in the meantime, we have a very comprehensive list available on cropnetwork.org that has this data from the Midwest with the chemistries that are good to very good against tar spot. And with that, I would like to thank you all for your attention, and I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Katya. Thank you, Larissa. Maybe one quick question, but otherwise, Larissa and Katya will be available here during the break and also during lunch. So anybody? One question?
And if you see tar spot, please let us know.
Oh, yeah. Thank you again. All right. So let me set up the. All right, so I will give little bit more introduction to our next speaker because he is never talked to us here before. So I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Brett Budmeyer. He is an extension assistant professor at the Weed Science and Invasive Plants Department. And Dr. Budmeyer is responsible for developing new outreach materials to educate pesticide applicators on all aspects of pesticide use and safety. His extension efforts focuses on certifying pesticide applicators in Florida for human and environmental health and safety. His background is research includes aquatic invasive plant management using herbicides. Before working at UF, Dr. Budmeyer worked on aquatic plant management and mosquito control in the private sector. So I think he's already sharing his screen. And here you go. The stage is yours. Thank you.
All right. Are you able to hear me? If you can see thumbs up, is everybody able to hear me clearly?
Yes, I think you are good.
All right. Well, then I'm going to take it away because we've got a fair amount to cover, and I want to make sure I keep you relatively close on time. I am with the Pesticide Information Office, which means, as you kind of heard in the introduction, we're tasked with testing and training applicators across the state. So developing the manuals and materials, the test, and then also staying up to date with some of the regulatory changes that are coming that will impact each of you, and then working to get that information out. So what we're going to talk about today are some of the updates that are coming from EPA. Some of what we'll discuss, I'll highlight, already exists. Some of it is proposed, which means pieces of it could change, but the overall arch that I'm giving you is very likely to be the mechanism that EPA uses to make some of the changes coming forward. So primarily what we're talking about is endangered species and the inherent conflict that exists even within EPA as it relates to endangered species. So you have FIFRA that's under EPA, and this is what registers pesticides. This is what makes your labels, says here's the requirements for getting your license, all the stuff that we know, right? Well, the Endangered Species Act is also housed within EPA, and their job is to protect endangered species, which means there's somewhat of a conflict that EPA, in servicing both of these acts, has to go ahead and try to mitigate. Now, EPA does all of the pesticide pieces, right? They do the research on where pesticides are in the environment, how they break down, all the things that go into registration. Well, they work hand in hand with the agencies. So this is the Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries. And what they're doing is EPA will say, here's all the things we know about a pesticide. We need you to give us some information about the endangered species, because these are the services that understand where these species live, how they survive, what their range is, all of the information about the endangered species. So they have to collaborate, especially if they find that there is overlap. So the EPA will do something called a biological evaluation, where they essentially look through a pesticide and say, is there a chance it could come in contact with an endangered species? And then they look at, is there a chance that an individual could be negatively impacted? So they'll kind of do this like bulk sort, where they'll look at the pesticides and then determine which ones are likely to be impacted versus not. Now, that impacted doesn't mean the species as a whole. It means could an individual species, let's just make one up, the grasshopper eating flying monkey. And the flying monkey ends up wandering into a sweet corn field, and by eating that grasshopper that's sprayed with a pesticide, an individual could get sick and die. So that goes into the evaluation, and then they ultimately come up with an opinion. And maybe that opinion is, well, the flying grasshopper monkey is only in this area from May to June. So you can't use that product from May to June. That's how we mitigate destroying that species. So there's this consultation that goes on. Well, that system broke down. So a lot of the products that were initially registered didn't necessarily consider the Endangered Species Act. So as they were going through the re-registration process, they started really digging into that. And what happened is they got terribly behind. If EPA were to dedicate the amount of resources that they have been and work through the list that they already have, they would take till 2030 to only get through 5% of the products that they need to look through. So this is way behind and they were never going to catch up. So something needs to change. Well, there were special interest groups that started suing the EPA and said, look, you're not meeting your obligations as it relates to endangered species. And the EPA had to admit, you're right, we're not, and they settled that suit. The biggest thing is that the process was very, very slow and unsustainable. We couldn't keep going the way we were. And the way they were doing it was a label by label, species by species interaction, and every label was individually trying to address endangered species. Now, I may not be able to hear you, but hopefully you'll all say it. The label is all right, I'm going to assume everybody said law, right? So the label is where we handle everything. That is the instructions that I'm supposed to do. That should have all of the endangered species things. And in the past, that was typically handled in the environmental hazard section, right? So it was saying things like you can't put this in water. Maybe there's some dates that you can't apply. Those of us using insecticides have seen the B boxes. So the labels were beginning to address endangered species, but there was a problem. How do you communicate complex information like this? So show of hands that I can see the room. How many of you have ever seen this map? Show of hands. Who has seen this map? All right, this is not unheard of. Most people haven't. And the problem is this map isn't a proposed map. This is live now. These are very real restrictions that apply to our pesticides that we have to be aware of. So those pink areas are something known as a PULA, or a pesticide use limitation area. And what that means, it is a defined area in time and space. So those are not a static thing, right? Those pink areas can change over time and can be adapted and moved by EPA, which means how do we deal with something that is changing in time with a label that is fixed in time? So as these things change, how are we going to deal with that? Well, what those pink areas tell you is in that area, you cannot use that pesticide as the label describes. There's more things you must do to be in compliance. And by the way, you have to check those maps no sooner than 6 months before you do a treatment. So you don't have to check the day before, but you can't look out and go, well, I know what I'm going to do next year. Let's build my plan, and here we go. So EPA is already saying we know that information changes and you need to be aware of it. And where you are starting to see this on labels is directly in the directions for use. There is a subset that says endangered species protection requirements, and it will direct you to a website. Where this is important is if a website is listed on a label, that website becomes the label. So this isn't just a website that you can go to if you want to. It is a direction on the label. It is required for you to do that to be in compliance with the label. So show of hands, how many have seen this on any of your products? All right, I don't see too many hands. I'm here to tell you, you're going to see this on almost all of your products at some point in the future. So this is a process we need to become familiar with. Now, in typical EPA fashion, if you click that web link, rather than taking you where you need to go, it drops you to this page, a generic endangered species page. So I will ask you to find on that tremendous number of links, where is this map that I showed you? Where are these PULAs? Well, if we come all the way down, there's something called Bulletins Live 2. And if you remember nothing else from my talk today, just dig into your brain, Bulletins Live 2. Do a Google search, look it up. That is going to be very, very important as we move forward with what EPA is doing. All right, so we have found our Bulletins Live 2. If we click that, where does it take us? We're still not to the map. We have to ultimately click the right link, and it will take us here. Now, if you don't want to do a bunch of jumping around, that QR code that's on the screen will take you to this map. So those of you with phones that want this website and can't remember Bulletins Live 2, you just need to keep repeating that over and over. Go ahead and take a picture of that QR code and you can follow along a little bit. Now, what this is going to show you is the overall map, but many of you aren't interested in all of the limitations. You want to know the limitation for the product you are using. So that is where you will come over here to the left-hand side and you can put in your place. This can be the city you are in, and you can even put in latitude and longitude coordinates to find out if you are in a PULA. You put the month that you want to do your application and then your EPA registration number, and that is going to give you very specific information for your product. So let's take a deeper look at Florida and which PULAs we have. You can see there's one up in the Panhandle. There's one that covers the entire county of Palm Beach. And then we can see some other highlighted things here along the coast. So let's take a look at what those are. If we look at this PULA here, you can see that it is highlighted. I did not search specifically for my product. I wanted a list of all of the products. And what you will get on the left side is the list of products that do fall into this PULA. So what that means is if you are outside of the PULA, you use your labels as normal. If you are inside the PULA, you have to follow the instructions that it gives. And it may be something like this. During the months of April to September, apply malathion only when the wind is blowing away. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it is quite long, and you can understand why they may not put that on the label, because this is all dependent on which PULA you are in. So what you will get is ultimately something called a printable bulletin, hence Bulletins Live 2. And this is going to give you which products you've selected. So in this case, I just looked at all of them. But if you pick just one, it would have your product up there, the month that you are looking to do your application, and then it is going to list right here, this code tells you what your limitation would be. So in this case, for that PULA, there are two different restrictions for malathion. There is the ag restriction, which talks about putting in buffers, and then there's the mosquito restriction that says avoid application from April to September. So when are we trying to control mosquitoes in South Florida? Certainly from April to September. So what this is saying is you cannot use malathion to control mosquitoes in that area from April to September unless you do a consultation with Fish and Wildlife Service. Now, what that's going to look like, we don't know yet. Is that an individual by individual basis? Is that the state can put in a plan for how to do that? We don't know, but what's important for you to recognize is how to find out what these limitations are. So let's look at this one that is all of Palm Beach County. If you are anywhere inside that area, you have a PULA. And what that PULA is very simple. It's you cannot use these dicamba products in Palm Beach County, full stop. So even though the label may allow you to use it on the crop that you're looking for and all of those things, if you go to this website, you cannot use those products in that county. And then when we look up in the Panhandle, this PULA is again related to dicamba, and it gives you information about buffer zones. So all of these PULAs are unique and individual from each other. Now in Florida, they were relatively small. Some of these PULAs can be quite large. Here is one in the Pacific Northwest that covers 3 to 4 different states. And if you can look all the way at the top here, that is 56 pages if I include all of my products. So this is where knowing the area the PULA covers and which products I'm using is really important. So I used to do training on labels, and I said it doesn't really matter the registration number. Sure, you need to know where it is on the label. Well, I take those statements back. You need to start knowing where that registration number is so that you can plug it in to that Bulletins Live 2 to find out what your restrictions are. So this is an interactive map. It really lets you break down what the requirements are. And this is going to be critical for the major changes that we have coming. So in Florida, there are only those few PULAs that are currently live. Those are enforceable. If you are not abiding by those PULAs, you can get in trouble. That Bulletins Live 2 is what a lot of what I'm going to talk about next is very likely going to use. So we have a handful of PULAs now. I anticipate that we will have many more when EPA finishes with some of the things we are discussing. So there are major changes coming. We mentioned that the EPA settled their lawsuit, and in working with the Endangered Species Plan, they have put a roadmap together for how they're going to come into compliance. One of those is how they do registration. We are not going to talk about that. We are going to talk about how they're going to do drift and erosion control. They're going to use Bulletins Live 2 to communicate this information. So the days of the label being the only thing you needed are gone. And this is all to protect endangered species and to start speeding up this plan. So the first piece of this puzzle that they put together was the Vulnerable Species Pilot Project. Again, where you see a QR code, you can take a picture of that and it will take you to a website that gives you more information. So what they were doing with this is looking at how can we streamline our decisions. So they grabbed 27 pilot species or critical habitats, and they said, we are going to come up with a process that we can use to apply to the other thousands of endangered species so that we can make decisions much faster. So they put together a plan of how they were proposing to do that for the rest, and that's what we're going to look at here. Again, the idea is to streamline decisions. This is not final. This is not enforceable yet, but it is moving closer that direction. So what is the VSPP and what was the big piece that they were looking at? Well, they were building essentially more PULAs, but these PULAs look a little bit different. So here's our first ones that we have in Florida, and here's what that looks like a little bit closer up. We can see there are different zones. So outside the zone is my traffic light. That's my green light. I use the label, I'm good to go. I fall into this unhatched area, that's my PULA, that's a yellow light. I can still use my product, but I have to abide by whatever regulations are in addition to the label. And this hatched area is I cannot use any pesticides, full stop. So that's really important information to know. And the only place to get that is by going to that Bulletins Live 2. So now we're adding things like you flat cannot use any pesticides in certain areas. This is certainly a change from what we've had before. Now, what some of those mitigations may look like, we are already starting to see some examples in the PULAs that are out there now and in the proposals that they're looking at in some of these other pesticides. It's things like buffers, it's vegetative strips. You're going to hear a little bit more about that in just a second. So if you want more information about what the species is, the EPA has put together these sort of bulletins that walks through their thinking on what they were doing. It talks about why they're protecting this, where that habitat is, where pesticides come into that. And then within this, you're able to zoom into some of the proposed restrictions that they are looking at. So if you, for instance, are here on the south side of the lake, we can see there's a whole lot of agriculture that's growing along the lake. You might indeed find yourself in one of these PULAs. So they overlaid maps of what crops are grown where, how much product is used, and started coming up with what their mitigations might be. So again, in an area that isn't in highlight, you use your product as normal. If you are in one of those solid color areas, that's your yellow light, you need to do some of the mitigations, and that crosshatch means no pesticide at all. So let's take a sugarcane farmer who's growing on the south side of the lake here. They certainly fall into that PULA. So they are going to have to check their products to see what extra limitations they might have. So again, it's going to be things like buffer zones. It's going to be mitigating the time that you're treating, vegetative strips, all of the things that we know have other benefits as well. So with this vulnerable species pilot project, they have closed the comments. So they put in all the research, they put it up for public comments. EPA is now addressing those comments and looking to fine tune some of those details. So do we know that this is exactly what the map is going to look like? No. Do we know what all species are going to have this map and what products will fall under that? No. So the details we don't know, but the mechanism that they're using is very likely to stay in place. They are going to put extra restrictions that will be communicated on the label by telling you to go to Bulletins Live 2. So there are more changes going to come to this as to what it looks like in the end, but the overall structure is unlikely to change dramatically. All right, so that's the endangered species side. So we're looking at just endangered species in totality so that we don't have to look at each individual species with each individual pesticide. So the other side of that coin is, can we streamline our decisions for pesticides? And the first group up was herbicides. So they are coming up with a herbicide strategy. This is what they plan to use for all pesticides eventually. So the idea was to get a grouping of active ingredients that could serve as a stand-in for kind of all of the others. And again, this is to streamline decisions and start bringing EPA up to date. And this gets away from product by product decisions and starts making much bigger decisions on a group of pesticides. So the 12 herbicides that they looked at, you can see the list here. I'm sure that in looking at that list, some of these are products that you use, or you use products that fall very much in a similar class. So their thinking here is, rather than doing a registration on 2,4-D, 2,4-D acid, 2,4-D ester, it is 2,4-D and all things like 2,4-D, triclopyr, and a handful of other oxins. The decisions that we make for that group, we make for everything. So we're moving away from product by product, species by species decisions. And ultimately, what they're looking at with these products is, how do we reduce soil erosion? Because soil erosion and drift are the two primary concerns to endangered species, according to the EPA. So if we can reduce soil erosion and offsite drift, and we can find methodology that does that effectively, we can protect endangered species on a large scale and do so much more quickly. So their strategy for this, the term that you are probably going to be hearing more and more, is a pick list. And the way this will work is, a product and an area will have points assigned to it. So let's say I'm going to use 2,4-D in South Florida on the south edge of Lake Okeechobee. I have to get to 6 points. So I check my pool, it says 6 points, or my label, and I have to get to that with the mitigations I'm going to select. Now, I can pick any mitigation measure so long as I get to 6. Once I get to 6, I am allowed to use that product as listed on the label. And any of your pick list items can add up to that total so long as you get to that point. And this is what they are proposing. Mitigation measures would be things like vegetative filter strips, cover crops, riparian buffers, mulching. You get the idea. So let's say in this scenario, mulching counts for 3 and my field border counts for 3. I've hit my 6 points. I may now use this product. If I'm a farmer up in Oregon, that same product in Oregon may require me to get to 9 points. Well, I'm doing mulching and I'm doing strip cropping, but I don't have any other measures and I'm only at 6 points. I cannot use this product. So now you're starting to see that Bulletins Live 2 introduces the idea of the label isn't enough and we're giving you more restrictions. And now we're walking through, how do we understand those restrictions? So where are we with the herbicide strategy? So it's, the pick list will apply when you're in a known area. That pick list becomes the yellow light decision matrix. So rather than these PULAs that have all of this information that you have to follow, it becomes much more, all right, I'm using 2,4-D down here in the south. My PULA says I have to get to 6 points. I go to my pick list, I prove I'm at 6 points, and away I go. Where are we with the herbicide strategy? The comments are closed. They have not started addressing those comments yet, but that will start to happen soon. And again, there are changes likely to come as to the intimate details. What counts for what points, what mitigation measures work. There's a lot to figure out with this. But again, the overall strategy of making broader herbicide or pesticide decisions and using Bulletins Live 2 to communicate it is unlikely to change, in my opinion. So what's next? What else is coming? Well, if we're doing herbicides, now we need an insecticide strategy. And their proposed insecticide strategy is due to come out fairly soon. They will then have the rodenticide strategy. There is likely to be a fungicide strategy. And as they're working on these strategies, we are likely to see the VSPP finalized, and that will be what they use for all endangered species. The herbicide strategy at some point in the near future will be finalized, and then we are going to start seeing these mitigations come forward. And then how they communicate with the services still needs to be finalized. So what does that look like? All right, so lots of uncertainty, right? Don't think that all of those maps I showed you, other than the very first one, are in place and that pick list I showed you is guaranteed to be what happens. There is lots that is likely going to change. We are very likely to see more lawsuits come. I would expect that the one side said, hey, you're not protecting endangered species sued. We are very likely to see agriculture say, hey, these burdens are too much. We can't figure out if we can use a product and grow food responsibly. So we are likely to see the courts involved for some time. However, that roadmap that they proposed, the using of Bulletins Live 2, the changing the registration process, and the altering how the services get involved is very likely to stay in place. What's going to take time is ultimately the details. And that's, they say the devil is in the details. That's what's going to take time. What measures do we consider appropriate? How burdensome is this going to be? Where are the lines on the map? All of that stuff still has time to change. So what do you need to do? The first is familiarize yourself with Bulletins Live 2. Take some time and spend a little bit of time working through that map, understanding how to use it, because you're going to see this show up on more and more labels. Keep in contact with your county faculty. We are working very hard to keep them up to date so that they can communicate with you as effectively as possible. And keep in contact with our office. Some of the QR codes that you will see up there keep you in touch with us. It's our website, our blog. We put a lot of update information in our blog so that you can have the most up-to-date information. So the two most important things you can do is familiarize yourself with Bulletins Live 2, pay attention and be prepared. And I cannot stress enough, Bulletins Live 2, just drill that into your brain. And I think with that, I stayed within time and may have some time for questions.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Brett. Anybody has any questions? I know that's a lot. And what I try to do, Brett provided me his slideshow also. So when I send you guys the survey, the follow-up survey, I can send you this PDF with all the QR codes and all the informations on it. And like I mentioned before, we are recording this presentation, so it's gonna be available online. Not tomorrow, not after tomorrow, but hopefully pretty soon. But I can get you the PDF pretty much like, in the next couple of days. But if you have a question, we're gonna have a break after this, so we can have a few questions if you would like.
I'll ask a super quick question. Show of hands in the room, how many of you had heard the phrase Bulletins Live 2 before today? And I don't see any hands. How many of you are going to go look up Bulletins Live 2 when you are done with this training? Show of hands. Yeah, there we go.
That's called impact, huh?
I have the question.
Sorry, yeah. Yeah, one
So this Pula is just here in the US or is going everywhere and around the world? How farmers are going to be affected by this? Is it going to be more strict on importing vegetables and other products from international market? How this is going to be dealing? How we're going to be competitive?
So this is only for the United States because it is the US EPA in protecting endangered species. As far as what they do for crops coming in from other countries, they'll deal with that in the residue testing that they do, the tolerances that they build. I don't know what impact it's going to have across, the other areas that we get our food from, but this is just for the United States.
I see just chemicals. How about biologicals?
So this will only apply to herbicides, insecticides, rodenticides, fungicides, and their language uses the phrase conventional pesticides. So whether this pulls in the biopesticides or not is somewhat unclear, but biological control agents would be a whole separate deal.
Right. So let's start our second session. Or next, we are gonna focus more like on insects and animals. So our next speaker is going to be Dr. Julian Bioslan, and he's going to talk about sweet corn insect ecology and management. So use that.
All right. Good morning. Hope you guys can hear me okay. So I'm Julien Beuzelin, entomologist here, and today with Bryn Johnson. She's a PhD student in my program. We're going to talk about some aspects of insect management in corn. And this presentation will focus on these guys, corn seal flies. Even when we do everything right, we still end up having ears infested with corn seal fly maggots. And so I thought that we should spend some time talking about that this morning. First, I would like to talk a little bit about identification and sampling. Want to bring this to your attention. So this is a close-up of a corn seal fly maggot. You see it has that pointy end here, and here that flat end. So this is the mouth, this is the rear end, and this is how a corn seal fly maggot looks like. However, once in a while, you can see other maggots that look a little different. You see they have pointy ends on both ends, and these are phoid fly maggots. So I wanted to bring this to your attention. Phoid flies usually are not as much of a problem, but we're dealing with really a pest complex. This pest complex actually, so you have the phoid flies that you can see, but even the seal flies, all those maggots, they look alike, but actually we have 3 adult species that will lay eggs on the ears, and this will result in maggots. So you have Euxestes stigmatias, which is here, and let me see, is the pointer working? I'll show. Oh, it's all slow. Never mind. But so Euxestes stigmatias has those 4 dark bands on the wing, whereas Euxesta eluta really looks alike, but it has those clear dots. And actually, I have here some boxes that will pass around, and we have the 4 species. If you guys want to take a look, I know they're small, but this is what we have to deal with. Here is a different picture. A set of pictures with Euxestes stigmatias, Euxesta eluta, Echinopsis macilla. And I will not spend a lot of time on this, but those 3 actually are relatively different, with Euxestes stigmatias being the most challenging to control. And this is the most problematic. Euxesta eluta that is somewhat problematic, and Echinopsis macilla not as problematic, although we can see lots of adults in the field. And so talking about adults in the field, how do you know if you have an infestation? Well, if you have maggots, it's too late. So usually when we scout for adults, and we can use visual observations, go to the field, see what we have, yellow sticky cards. But we've also determined that multilayer traps, so these are those traps that you can see here with the clear dome and the yellow inverted funnel. We're doing a really good job at attracting flies with an ammonium acetate and a dimethoxybenzene lure. So this is something that can be used, and those methods are different with the direct visual informations, observations, which are easy to implement, but there can be a lot of variability depending on when you look at the flies, depending on who looks at the flies. The yellow sticky cards, now it's continuous and consistent sampling, it's inexpensive, but then you need some supplies, it's a sticky mess. And what we find is that actually we do collect more Echinopsis macilla with that. And the multilayer traps, active sampling that's continuous, more selective towards the 2 Euxesta, but you have the supplies that are needed, there's a cost, and so sometimes there is variability in the data. But we've used those multilayer traps for some studies to determine the species we've had in the fields, and it's worked really well. And I see that not as something that would assist scouting all the time on a systematic basis, but if you have an area where you have additional questions, or you really want to focus on a problematic area, this can help answer some questions. And so you see here the trap with, actually you can see that was in sugarcane, so hinting at the fact that we can find seal flies in sugarcane. I was mentioning supplies and cost, and earlier this year I was contacted by a gentleman, the company who makes the yellow sticky cards, also on products, and he said, "Oh, with our traps, we're capturing seal flies. Do you want to try them?" I say, "Sure." And so he sent me those containers, and I was not too impressed when I look at them because they are extremely cheap and all flimsy. But I will not show the data, but we tried those, and actually they worked as well as the multi-lure trap. So we know we have options. And so if you're interested in using traps in some problem areas, if you have questions, let us know, because with the multi-lure traps or those, we can sample seal flies. So now I will move on to landscape ecology. So what is landscape ecology? Well, basically what we want to know is where the flies are, when, so that then we can try to see what we can do to manage those flies. And so part of Larissa Pera Lima's master's degree, Larissa is in the room today, she's graduating this month. We had a 2-year survey where we look at those 48 sites, and we sampled sweet corn fields, sugarcane fields, non-crop woody areas. In the EA, we also had some in the Homestead region. And what we saw is that the flies were, the 3 species were in all habitats throughout the sweet corn growing season. And they were less abundant, those adults, in the sweet corn fields, which makes sense because we have the insecticide applications, but they were there. There was also some variability in the observation, showing that we definitely have a lot that we need to understand. But what was clear, and we have actually a quantification, is that the habitats that surround the sweet corn fields, they are refuges for the sweet corn, for the corn seal flies, the adults. So to better understand this, we worked here at the station in spring in 2021 and 2022. And we did that because we had, those times, we had a mature sugarcane in 2021 and harvested sugarcane in 2022. We had a young plant cane. We had here actually intensively managed sweet corn. The second year, some sweet corn that was not so intensively managed. And the second year, we also had rice. And what we did is we had a grid, see 154 points covering about 400 acres, so that we could try to map where the seal flies were. And so we used actually the multi-lure traps each spring for 4 weeks to see where the flies were. So here, this is for Euxesta eluta, and I want you to just focus on the patterns, and I'll explain. You can see that in the first year, Euxesta eluta was here where we had actually the tall, mature sugarcane. We also had a hotspot here, which was in a weedy area, and here there was also some tall sugarcane. It was not in the heavily sprayed sweet corn. The second year, you can see clearly Euxesta eluta here. This was that was the plant cane, but that was the tallest sugar cane at the station. And we also had some hotspots in the corn that was not so heavily sprayed. For Euxesta stigmata, so if you remember, I said that this was the more problematic species, Euxesta. Here you can see again distribution. Concentration here, over there. You see that corner over there? This corresponds to where the sweet corn was at the research station. So what we showed is that Euxesta eluta adults, they were everywhere, including in the sweet corn fields, but they were not there when those fields were treated, because they are highly susceptible to the insecticides. But so that suggests that the populations of Euxesta eluta, they move around, but they can be controlled. For Euxesta stigmatias, it was somewhat different, because in sweet corn field, the abundance was sometimes lower, but many times it could be as high in the non-crop areas. And actually, if we compared with other species, the probability of capturing Euxista eluta actually was greater in the sweet corn, regardless of the insecticide treatment. So this is consistent with what we know, the species, because it has a reduced susceptibility to pyrethroids, but this shows this association with corn. And so what that means is that in the environment, they can be everywhere, but the corn will really act as a magnet. And so for this particular species, this is very important. So avoiding weedy fields and borders that can harbor those flies can be important. Same thing for crop residue, coal piles. And also that shows the importance of sweet corn harvest residue destruction, because if you have infested sweet corn, then they'll emerge and they will go to another sweet corn field. So when we have that, what can we do about it? Because we understand the system better, but what can be done for management? So that was part of Larissa's master's. We started working on what we call behavioral manipulation. The idea is try to see if we can steer the flies away from the corn. And so for this, our first stab at it was to look at potential attractants. So we had Nuller and GF120. They are based on hydrolyzed corn proteins. Actually, we have some samples. If you want to see the Nuller, it smells like soy sauce, basically. And so the flies are potentially attracted to that. We also mixed with the DMB, which is in the traps, to see that synergize the attractiveness. And so we conducted lab studies and a field study. For the lab study, we put the flies in cages and give them a choice, and they will pass around that cage also. And the long story short is that the flies were really attracted to those potential attractants. So we took that to the field, and this is what I'm going to show now. So you see, this is here, Larissa actually spraying sugarcane with the attractants to see if we could move around the seal flies. We blanketed the field with the yellow sticky card so that we could see the distribution. So good news, bad news. If we look at the number of flies per card, you see, if we compare to water, for example, with the Nuller, we were definitely able to attract the seal flies. But if you look at the color of the bars, it was primarily Chaetopsis macilla. So we showed that actually we could move around the seal flies, but did not move around the species that we wanted. So this is something that Bryn is going to work on further on her PhD, but she's also going to work on other things, because to study that, we need to assess the movement of the flies.
Okay, so speaking of movement, that's something that we're super interested in. So when you're going into your fields and you're deciding where to spray, when to spray, it would be helpful to understand where they are. Now, unfortunately, with this particular set of species, this Euxesta species, we don't really know how they move. We don't know how far they can go. We don't know what directions they choose. We don't know how they orient themselves. So that's where I come in. So if we're trying to understand movement in the literature, the best way to currently do that is by using something called a mark release recapture study. MRR for short. Now, the first thing that you have to do is mark them. So that was the first part of my priority list. Now, when we were thinking of marking, we used the literature to come up with 3 potential methods. Now, the first method was something that we called pupil marking. The second method was something that we called internal or feeding marking. And the final one was called external marking. Now, essentially what happened was that in the pupil marking, we took the immature flies, dusted them with a fluorescent pigment by the name of day glow, and then waited for them to emerge. Now, what we were hoping was that when they emerged, we would see that there would be some sort of discernible mark that we could use to locate them if we were to release them in a field. Now, for the internal marking method, we essentially just fed them dye. Hoped that when we squished them, we could see it in their stomach. I'll show you how that went. Don't get your hopes up. And then finally, we had the external marking, where we took adults, dusted them with pigment, and hoped that they did not groom all of it off. Now, what we saw was that through a couple rounds of studies, mostly preliminary, we actually found that we were able to make a discernible mark. So if you did not know, flies are not blue. They're actually black. So up top is our control. So for our pupil study, what we found was that when we took the pupae and we dyed them, we were able to see that the heads were significantly dyed. Now, specifically, we were hoping that the dye ended up in something called a talinal suture. Now, that's essentially just a fold that's on their forehead. That's not super important. But what we found was that at the very least, we could see it on their head. So that was good. Now, for the internal feeding, if you don't have your glasses on, you might think that nothing is happening here. Thankfully, there is a little bit of like a highlighter yellow that I hope you can see. So what we started by doing is that we fed the flies a fluorescent dye. Now, we noticed that this was really inconsistent. It didn't work very well. And after they stopped feeding, we couldn't see the mark at all. So we actually switched to using food dye instead. Food dye was a little bit better, but we don't have any pictures of it, so we have this one to use. And then finally, for the external marking, we found that we were able to mark the flies. So they did groom most of it off, but after 7 days, we were able to see that it was still clear on the thorax, which is the middle part of the body. So overall, our goal here was to find a marking study so that we can do the mark release recapture. Now, when we do the mark release recapture, our goal is to set certain types of plot points. And essentially, we're going to release the flies from certain distances and from certain directions on the outside perimeter of a cornfield. And then in the center of the cornfield, we're going to have some traps, and we're just going to try to see which ones that we can find. So if I were to set that up in a diagram, what it would look like is this. Now, let's say this is your cornfield. In the center of your cornfield, I would put a bunch of traps. So it would be a combination of two types of traps, an active type of trapping using the multi-lure, that thing that's been passed around. And we'd also use a passive type of trapping, the sticky cards, which I don't think we passed around, but hopefully they're sticky and they look like a card. Now, ideally, we would be able to release the flies from 8 points. Flies would be released from 2 points in the west, north, east, and south. And the two differences would be that they would be released from 500 meters from the trap or 100 meters from the trap. Now, for each distance and for each direction, they would be marked with a different color. So for example, 500 meters from the north would be blue. 100 meters from the north would be pink, or whatever, so on and so forth. And eventually, when we look in our traps, we would be able to correspond the color of the flies with where they came from. So ideally, we could use that information to find out how far they can go and how they fly in a directional manner, and that's our goal. So with that being said, I'll hand it back over to Dr. Buselin. If you have any questions, you can see me after the presentation.
Thank you very much, Bren. So we wanted to show you that we have some results, but we're also working on a better understanding the biology of those insects so that we can really develop novel techniques to manage them. But I will talk about insecticides now because they remain the main method to control the seal flies. We rely primarily on pyrethroids, and I want to talk just a little bit about performance at maximum label rates. There are not always differences among the pyrethroids, so this is not the ultimate list, and they can be overlap, but we've seen a hero, which is a premix of zeta-sapropamethrin and bifenthrin, typically working best, followed by Mustang Max, Warrior work well. Brigade, Bathroid, and Asana have, in my experience, tend not to work as well, with probably Bathroid and Asana by themselves not looking best. So what can we do to help those pyrethroids do the job? Well, tank mixing with a methomyl, which is used for fall armyworm control, will help. Tank mixing 2 pyrethroids, so now you have to look at 2 labels, but this is also something that can help. We've shown limited data set, but actually evening applications seem to work a little bit better than morning or midday application based on what pyrethroids, they are UV sensitive and how the flies move. That makes sense. We know this is not always practical, but this is something that should be considered. But I want to spend a little bit of time to talk about PBO. Do you know what PBO is? You should. Okay. So it's a synergist, so it helps the pyrethroids work better by inhibiting some enzymes. And so this is definitely something that should be considered when you have intermediate to a high pest pressure. However, what is complicated is that the PBO rate can change with the pyrethroid that you use and the rate of that pyrethroid. So if we look at exponent, and we have a valent MGK rep in the room, I believe. Yes. So if you have questions for Jared. But Exponent is a popular PBO product. And if you read the label, you have that explanation that tells you what the rate should be relative to the amount of active ingredient that you put, and you have that equation here. But the recommendation is to have pyrethroid to PBO a ratio to be 1:1 to 1:10. If you look at the label, actually you have this table that provides some recommendations. So for example, if we look at Baythroid, beta-cyphothrine, and for example, Brigade here, that's bifenthrin. You see with different rates, there is a recommended rate of PBO, but you can go to a maximum of 8 ounces. So for example, for the Baythroid, a low rate that we usually don't use in corn is 1.6 fluid ounces. So you would put 2 ounces of PBO, and the 2.8 rate, which is the one we would typically use, we would go to 3.5 ounces. But should we put less PBO, maybe? Should we put maybe more? That's a question that we had. So actually this year we had the opportunity to look at populations of seal flies. We had a couple, and look at Baythroid and Exponent. So that's beta-cyphothrine and PBO. And so we looked at 11 treatments. We had a check that was water, the low rate of Baythroid and the high rate. And each time we had different ratios of PBO. And here, this is the recommendation is here, is the 1:10 ratio. We did that experiment in a spray booth, so that was not in the field, so under lab conditions. As I said, we had 2 populations. For the first population, actually, we look at a total of more than 500 flies. The second population, more than 700 flies. And you see when we apply water in the spray booth, our mortality is about 10%. That's mortality I'm showing here. And in orange, this is the efficacy of the Baythroid just by itself. So if you look at the low rate, it's 35% mortality after 24 hours. Here, 40% mortality after 24 hours. So that's really not very good. If you use the max rate, it's better. But you see it's still far from being perfect. Nearly 80% here, but here just 60% of the flies were dead with a high rate of Baythroid. And now when you add the PBO, you see that even less than the recommended rate will significantly increase mortality. And if you look at the recommended rate, especially for those high rates of Baythroid, which we would consider, typically we have a substantially higher mortality, and statistically it's not different from the one that is higher or lower, which tells me that, well, at least for Baythroid, the data suggests that following the recommended rate is a good idea. You could potentially go a little lower. You could also go higher, but it looks like going higher will help, but not much. So we will probably continue doing some of that PBO work because I think it's very informative. We'd like to do that with more populations and more pyrethroids. Before I finish, I wanted to talk about one field evaluation that we had here this spring. For those of you that are familiar with seal flies and sweet corn, you know that we rely on pyrethroids and we do not have many other options. So we've aggressively looked for other options, whether biologicals, other modes of action, and so far not much has worked, at least by contact. But this year we looked at a few things. We looked at plinazoline at a high rate. Plinazoline is a new product from Syngenta. It's still not registered in the United States, but it's registered in Latin America. It's a mode of action group 30. So we're curious, but also we've sprayed for aphids with Transform or Ridgeback. Ridgeback being bifenthrin, which is Brigade plus the Transform. So we wanted to see if the aphid product was helping. And throw in there a couple more things. We've shown in the past that Radiant at a high rate helped with the seal flies. So we tried tank mixing radiant with the bifenthrin at a low rate. And also we thought that maybe diatomaceous earth could have an effect. So we tried to put diatomaceous earth here, tank mix, but at a very low rate, which does not change the way we apply the chemicals. But eventually there's still a residue to see if there's an effect. We use a CO2 pressurized backpack sprayers. So our plots, this is a typical setup, 8 rows wide, 34 feet long. And so we apply once every other day for 2 weeks. We had 9 applications for this particular test, and I apply at 9 gallons per acre. We use sticky cards to look at adults, and we collect ears in the plots. Today, I'll just talk about the ears for infestations. If we look, this is the setup to spray. So it can be challenging to mimic a ground rig or an airplane, but that's the best we've come up with. And so here are the results showing a number of maggots per ear. Right-hand side, this is the non-treated. You see we had between 15 and 20 maggots per ear on average. If we think of brigade as our bifenthrin standard, you see we had about a 50% reduction in a maggot infestation. So shows you that we cannot clean up the ears under our conditions, but we typically work within that range to see if we have an effect, and we can potentially go lower. So transform, the aphid product, didn't do anything to the seal flies. The aphid product pre-mixed with the bifenthrin, which is ridgeback, no added benefit. Tank mixing radiant or tank mixing the diatomaceous earth, no evidence of any benefit. What was very promising is that a new mode of action, new insecticide, actually was providing control. So we might have to jump through some hoops, but we hope we can work with Syngenta to see if we can generate additional data with this particular product so that the sweet corn industry can continue growing sweet corn. Oops. So, all right. So before I finish, I'd like to thank all the people who have worked on this, the graduate students, Donna, Amir, and Mariana, assistants who helped with data collection, current and former crop consultants, all the work on Sealfly, whether it's the idea, the collections, access to fields and everything would not be possible. We also work hand in hand with agrochemical companies. And a lot of this work is also funded independently through FDACs and the USDA. So I wanted to make sure that we thank them. If you have questions, I'll be glad to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian. Anybody has any questions for Julian? If not right now, thank you again. And you can find him during the lunch break.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Oh.
I forgot.
So
could you figure out which one was which one? There's no present or prize or anything, but. All right, so number 1 was Euxesta stigmatias, number 2, Euxesta eluta, and number 3 was Chytopsis macilla. So if you're interested in taking another look, we can check later. If you want to keep one of those boxes with you, we'd be happy to donate the box. Thanks.
And we are working on a little handout anyway. So next time we're gonna have nice pictures and everything in case you are interested in differentiate among the 3 species. All right. So this is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Actually, he is one of our sponsors today. So we're gonna have a short presentation from Cypress Agritech. And so Joey Trout is going to give a little presentation about their automated pest control system. So I'm looking forward to it. And then let's see how it's gonna work out. Here you go, the stage is yours, and you can use this mic. Yeah, you can click with this one, advance it, or just use this. Here.
Okay, my name is Joey Trout from Cypress Agritech. What we do is we connect growers to emerging technologies that address labor, time constraints, operational bottlenecks that occur in the field. We're based out of Bakersfield, California, but I now am based out of Hillsborough County, Florida. Come down to Belle Glade area a couple times a month, give or take. Here's just a brief glance of some of the solutions we've vetted out over the years. What we'll do is we'll vet out the manufacturer, the developer of that solution. Oftentimes, they don't have enough time to get feedback from growers in the field. That's where we come in. Oftentimes, at the same time, growers don't have a ton of time to research this on their own. So we kind of act as, or attempt to, a single channel for growers to access technology a little faster and deploy it and test it out, hopefully easier than before. But today we're gonna spend time focusing on the bird laser deterrent. And I have a demo unit that I'll pass around here in just a second. So the bird laser deterrent, it's a silent, effective, humane solution to specifically bird control. There's an autonomous version, which I did not bring today. It's rather large. I will be passing around the handheld deterrent in a second. It's the same exact laser beam. The autonomous solution, it's durable. It's meant to be a long-term solution to your bird control, whether it's from a seasonal perspective or it's something that you rotate around with various crops. And again, it's meant to promote a humane abatement of birds. Patented Class 3B beam within the laser. That's the highest classification of laser beam you can have without needing a special permit. So a lot of you around this area may or may not have seen already the Carbon Robotics laser weeding machine. That's a Class 4 laser beam that'll actually zap something, in their case, a weed. This will not zap anything. It won't zap birds out of the sky, but it is meant to deter them because of how high powered that laser beam is, as well as the widened aperture of the beam, which we'll get to in a second. But first, let's look at some common traditional methods. Some of you may already use some of these methods or seen them or heard them. Things like cannons, bird call sound machines. We've all seen scarecrows in the past. Falconry, bird netting is typically used in specialty crops like berries and grapes. And then, of course, there's avian control, liquid repellents, firearms, and firecrackers. And I've even seen this guy around on some farms. I'm not sure how effective it is, but it's usually something I tend to see at auto dealerships, but I have seen it on some farms. So there are, with some of those common traditional methods, some reoccurring costs. I have personally seen and heard from growers myself, hey, we might use some noise bangers or some blanks and have guys ride around on gators during the day in an attempt to scare or disperse the birds away from, in your guys' case, the sweet corn. There's hourly costs to that labor, as you know. Costs are going to continue to go up slowly over time. There's also time loss when doing those tasks. Labor is a very valuable resource, very scarce. So using that labor to deter birds specifically during the day is only obviously taking them away from other laborious tasks around the farm. And then, of course, talking to some guys around here, which I'll get to later on again, helicopter operators, those are not cheap. I have heard that growers around here are accustomed to using them, and it is effective, but we'll explore sort of the cost effectiveness of that compared to the laser solution. So why does the laser work? Let's talk about birds for a second. A bird's eye, birds have an extra oil in their eye compared to us human beings. So a bird's eye is naturally better than that of the human eye, but it also sees the world in a different color variation than we can because of that extra oil. It also means that their eyesight is actually more sensitive than ours, and they're cautious of aerial objects, right? This being pest birds specifically. Now, a predatorial bird, a hawk, a falcon, they're not afraid of anything, right? They are the predators of the sky. But a pest bird, maybe some of you commonly see anything from starlings to crows to pigeons to dove to ravens in your field. Those are not a predatorial bird species. Those tend to be afraid of what might be moving towards them in the sky. It's sort of their instinct to be afraid of an aerial predator. And that's where the laser comes in. So this solution was designed back in 2015. We've been distributing it and servicing it and consulting growers on it since 2019. We've deployed over 500 units. And its silent nature, its autonomous nature, its ability to rotate 360 degrees, and its widened aperture all play into its effectiveness. This is a demo unit. I'll show you what I mean by widened aperture here. I won't hit you, don't worry. So it's pretty bright right now. Obviously we're inside, but by widened aperture, the width of this beam, you can tell this is not a laser pointer. This is a commercial class 3B laser beam that's meant to be effective over large distances. I will pass this around for those of you who want to check it out. Don't shine your neighbor or myself, but feel free to point it at the roof or something. Now, not just the presence of the beam is what makes this effective. There's a microchip on the rear cap of this laser unit. You can kind of see this rear cap in the middle picture here with the solar panels. That's a laser unit in a vineyard. That microchip is reading the patterns that myself or my team is programming in the field. So if you have a ranch that you want coverage on, we're going out there after already consulting with you. And as we're out there on a ladder or some sort of higher surface, following the beam through your field, it's something we typically do around dawn or dusk, so we can see the beam very well across a long distance, because during bright daylight, our human eyes will lose sight of this beam after 50 or so yards. But a bird's eye will continue to see this. We want to get it at a height, and I'll show you some mounting examples in a second, and angle it downward. So you're never really pointing it in the sky to disperse the birds or trying to get them to disperse away from the sky. They're going to fly regardless. That's not the behavior we're trying to disrupt. We're trying to disrupt the foraging, the nesting behavior, the scouting behavior for when they fly into the sweet corn. What's going to stop them from getting comfortable? Because once they're comfortable, that's when they tend to forage. And the constant motion of this, angled downward at your corn constantly during the day, is what mimics that aerial threat, which is what pest birds will instinctually try to avoid. So here are some mounting examples. The example on the far right on the post is actually our most typical mounting style, but for row crops such as sweet corn or other leafy green vegetables, we've worked with a ton of growers over the years who have been quite inventive and have created sort of a trailer mount system that we've adopted for these types of crops. This just gives you the ability to be mobile with your laser deterrent, right? It is quite an investment. So whether you want to move it from planting to planting more easily or move it around every few weeks just to kind of keep the birds on their toes and on their wings, if you will. Here are some sort of images of product and environment. And I have a ton more of these examples, but obviously just wanted to limit it to only a few today. So as mentioned, we are newer to the Florida market. So I'm going to give you a few sort of testimonials, references from growers. You're more than welcome to contact these growers. I already ran it by them. I told them I was speaking to you all good folks today. My email will be at the end of this presentation should you want this in that format. But here's one of two grower references I'll go over. This is Steve Nunes, a Massachusetts sweet corn grower. and he's growing in the heat of summer out there in Massachusetts, the only time of year that really a lot of crops are being harvested up there. So he's competing with a lot of crops. So you'd think maybe his bird damage wouldn't be to that much of a great extent because you have, berries, wine grapes, other things growing up there. But with Steve, pre-laser, he figured he was losing 50% of his crop. Post-laser, he now believes he only loses 10% of his crop that he's attributing to birds specifically. That's pretty good because what we look for when deploying this and what we tell growers is 80 to 90% reduction. Nothing's quite 100%. I'll never guarantee that 100%. If you find that it's 100%, great, but we usually look for 80 to 90%. And Steve going from 50% crop loss to 10 is pretty good. He deploys this several weeks before maturity. Now, a lot of growers I talk to who are new to this concept will challenge me on, hey, the birds really aren't an issue until maturity. That's when they'll start foraging the corn. Well, they'll still be around likely, right? Pre-harvest scout mode, if you will. And the more you can disrupt that behavior before they get comfortable and start foraging your crop, the more you will see the benefits of reducing crop loss due to birds. One more grower reference from Dale Arbaugh, who's used our system now for a few years, an Ohio sweet corn grower. He will deploy his even a little earlier, several weeks after planting. He'll start that proactive process of deterring birds. I called Dale the other day just to get some statistics from him. Again, are you okay with me using you as a reference? He was. He had mentioned to me that his yield was only 120 bushels an acre on a 75-acre field, pre-laser. He now uses 3 lasers to cover that 75-acre field. In 2021, that yield was pushed up to 213 bushels an acre, and this year 203 bushels an acre. So pretty considerable improvement for Dale on his bird control methods. And then I'd like to thank the folks at Glade Crop Care. Dudley and David were nice enough to give me some stats. They have a lot more experience in this market than I do down here in South Florida. They had mentioned that they were talking to a grower the other day. Obviously, growers will commonly use firearms and helicopters currently. That could range from 50 to 100,000 in seasonal costs, maybe $100 an acre for a helicopter, 500 to 1,000 per hour for a helicopter operator. And some growers in this area have seen 30% crop loss due to birds, which sounds about right to me. This seems to be a pretty heavy area for bird pressure from January to April, specifically in that February-March timeframe when maturity is hitting. So if that's the case, if you're experiencing bird pressure around February, March, it's likely that birds are in the area kind of scouting come January, maybe later in the month. It'd be a good time for us to talk. Maybe I can come do it. Even if the birds aren't yet foraging your ranch come January or February, but you see some in the area, I'd be happy to show you how effective the laser is in person on your ranch, and then you can make your judgment from there. Now, it is a very flexible solution, but it is an investment. So there is obviously a seasonal rental opportunity on top of a purchase, on top of a purchase after rental. Most of our customers, of those 500 deployments we've done across the US, across different crop types, will end up purchasing the unit because it's a very durable unit. It's modular. So if something goes wrong after the 2-year manufacturer's warranty, it's an easy replacement. Typically, the biggest thing I see go awry after that warranty period is about year 5. The bulb that powers that high-powered beam will eventually die out after about 5 years. It'll, like any bulb, eventually burn out. But that's an easy replacement. It's sort of like replacing the brakes on your car. You're not going to get a whole new car. you're going to replace the brakes and move on. But most new customers, most new contacts of ours will rent it, and that's what I would recommend. Try it out for a season, rent it for a few months, maybe even do an A/B test. Don't think that you have to cover your entire cornfield. You know your field way better than we will ever know your field. So if you know of spots, maybe it's by a creek, maybe it's by a tree line, that are more susceptible to bird pressure, let's throw one up there, rent it for a few months, see how you like it. If it works for you, that decision is totally on you. Would you prefer to rent it every year, rent a fleet like some customers do, and we take care of the maintenance and you're always getting in? Or would you like to purchase it, own it for several years, in which case every season your per acre cost will go down, right? Because you own it. And here are some frequently asked questions. How many acres does one unit cover? You're looking at 30 acres for a single unit, but you can stretch that coverage. Say you have an 80-acre field with just a couple units kind of positioned strategically on opposite sides of each other. The laser is going to be working and shining for you all day long. So as one shines over here, one shines over there, they're kind of working in tandem simultaneously. You can usually squeeze a little more coverage if you have multiple. But again, you don't want to cover too much because it is just a single beam. There is a particular speed we like to set it at, because if that beam moves too quickly, then a bird is not going to see it. It's going to be like a quick flash of light. You want it. Our team wants to time it just right on the application so that the speed is kind of like a fast jogging pace around your field. That will mimic that of the flight of an aerial predator. When is best to deploy the system in this crop type, sweet corn? Several weeks before maturity. Get ahead of the issue, be proactive. We covered the longevity of a unit. You can power this using 2 100-watt solar panels or 110 outlet. Most of the time, our agriculture applications do use solar, which is fine. And it'll power on automatically for you at, say, 6 a.m., power off automatically, let's say 6 p.m., depending on the time of year. It will run that whole time for you. Is it safe for workers and visitors? Yes, it is. We've had 0 reports of birds falling out of the sky, nor have we had any reports of workers having an eye injury because of this. It would be quite difficult, right? So you'd have to stare into the beam directly. Whoever has the laser right now, please don't do this, but you'd have to stare into the beam directly for about 15 straight seconds, sort of like you were staring at the sun, for really severe eye damage to set in. Most of the time, if you come in contact with the laser, it might hit the side of your eye, or maybe you'll accidentally look up as it's cutting across the field. And the best comparison I can give to you on that is sort of like if someone's sitting next to you in your car and has their phone positioned facing up, the sun glare hits it, and it's just a real brief annoyance, if anything, but nothing that's going to cause even flash blindness. And then again, what birds will it work on? It'll work on all press birds and waterfowl. It will not work on predatorial birds for the reason of they do not have a predator. They are the predators of the sky, which there are benefits to that, right? Because they can take care of other critters around your farm. We have had reports from growers and university professionals we've worked with that this does work on coyotes or deer. But it's not something we market because it's just a few offhand examples that I have for you there. And then lead time on a unit, it's very quick, 3 to 5 business days. Us being new to the area, we want to make sure that things are done correctly. This is a new technology to a lot of you guys. So we could probably, if anyone here is interested in trying it out this year, we can probably cut some deals on the installation cost and go from there. And then before I get to the end, I'll show you a quick video. This is not a promotional video. I didn't want to show you that. I wanted to show you a real example from in the field. Yeah. So I'll I'll start this over real quick because, again, this is a bright day, right? It's hard for us to kind of see the laser. So you'll see the laser at the bottom of this screen real briefly, and we're going to draw it up. This is a commercial dairy farm in Utah. We're going to try to get these birds off this roof. So you might see it at the beginning. You'll probably lose sight of it. And then eventually you'll see the birds disperse towards the end of the video. So they do not like it. They view it again as instinctually as something coming at them in the air, right? An aerial predator. Lastly, we have YouTube, Instagram, all that good stuff. Plenty more videos for you to check out when you're bored later. So feel free to check them out. Feel free to email me here if you want some of these references. Again, they've expressed their welcomeness to talk to any one of you on the efficacy of this. And lastly, I guess I'll open it up to if anyone has any quick questions before I go.
Thank you, Joey. Anybody has any questions? You can find him during lunchtime, so just don't be afraid to connect with him. Thank you again. Thank you. Sign your certification sheet. And like I said, this is going to be posted online hopefully soon. I'll show you where, and so you will be able to review it again.